Good morning to the posse and to all others who would join us today on Ideas Have Consequences for a YouTube Live event. So today we're discussing, all Q&As have a tendency to meander, and no doubt we'll hit a variety of topics today. But the topic that you voted for on my Twitter account, my Twitter poll, is the World Economic Forum. You know, we've covered the World Economic Forum a number of times, and there's just endless interest in this, and for very good reason. And that is because the World Economic Forum is a sinister, specter-like organization that continues to have more and more influence. Now, I want to say a few things that some of you have probably heard me say before, but if you're new, perhaps you haven't. I was at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland for their annual meeting earlier this year. That is in January of this year. And I just put out a Twitter poll asking you if you thought that I should go again this coming year. The 2024 gathering, which takes place in the second week of, it takes place in mid-January of 2024, and asking you guys, do you want me to go again? And I was very honest in saying I really don't want to go. It's just not something that really appeals to me. First of all, it's not an easy place to get to. Second of all, if you've ever been to places where you feel a kind of spiritual oppression, then you maybe will know what I mean when I say that it's a kind of lonely place. And others of you might say, well, how is that? Davos is a ski town, right? It's up in the Alps. It's beautiful. This isn't a third world country you're talking about going to. It's a spiritually dark place, and it's because it's the gathering of individuals who have bought into the belief that utopia can be built. They really believe that utopia can be built. And this is the logical outworking of a secular mindset. In many ways, Fixed Point Foundation, the organization that I founded and that I direct, we really got our start. We opened our doors in 2004, so we're about to have our 20th anniversary. And we captured international headlines with debates on atheism, the academic atheism that was then penetrating not just the academy, but was starting to penetrate the culture in a very big way with guys like Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, Michael Shermer, Peter Singer, and others. And we began, taking them on in major debates all around the world. The Edinburgh International Festival, Oxford University, Melbourne, Australia, Princeton, WashU, St. Louis, elsewhere. We were Seattle, Washington, Birmingham, Alabama, my own home. We began taking on these individuals. And that is because we could see logically where this was going. This kind of atheism, and that is to say that it eventually leads you to a place that's very, very dark indeed, because as Dostoevsky pointed out in The Brothers Karamazov, if there is no immortality, there can be no virtue, and all things are permissible. Or to restate it another way, if there is no God, there's no ultimate right and wrong, and you can do anything you can get away with, because there's no one to judge you in the next life for your actions in this one. Now, what does that have to do with the World Economic Forum? Well, the World Economic Forum is an organization that I would say has just taken that kind of thinking to its logical outcome. They're no longer having debates over the existence of God. They just kind of assume there isn't a God. And the result is it leads them to make any number of anti-human, and they are fundamentally anti-human decisions. So the World Economic Forum, from my point of view, is a very, very dark organization indeed. And I've called them the HOA from hell. That's just a way for you to kind of think about them. If you've ever dealt with an HOA, that is to say a homeowners association, if you have one or if you've ever had one. I rarely meet people who like their homeowners associations. And it is because if you have an institution, say like a university or a school, a public school, even a private one, if you have a law firm, a medical organization, whatever it is, a business organization, it's a very strange phenomenon. And that is that it'll ultimately be run by the liberal wing, the most liberal wing within that organization. Very rarely is it conservatives who are in charge. Now, I know that some on the left would hear me say this and say, well, it's because we're smarter, we're better educated, we're more sophisticated, we're more organized, we're better suited to being in charge. No, it's because you're the kind of people who long to tell everyone else what to do. You long to tell everyone else what to do. I think the average conservative gets up in the morning, grabs their cup of coffee, and begins thinking about their day. Well, the average leftist wakes up in the morning, they grab their cup of coffee, and they begin thinking about your day too. They begin thinking about how to organize your day, how to organize your life. They are worried that the guy who lives next door might be free. He might be doing something that they don't approve of. And thus, that's the World Economic Forum. They're, as I say, like the HOA from hell. And this brings me to a central feature to what the World Economic Forum is driven by. And it's driven by, again, the assumption that there is no God. I mean, these aren't necessarily what I call philosophical atheists. Philosophical atheists are individuals that have thought deeply on the question of whether or not there is or isn't a God, and it's a fairly defining characteristic for them. These are individuals who are more of what I call cultural atheists. And by that, I simply mean individuals who maybe they haven't really thought deeply on the question at all regarding God's existence. They just kind of absorbed the idea that he isn't and lived their lives accordingly. The World Economic Forum, beyond that characteristic, these are individuals who are arrogant to an extraordinary degree. I mean, imagine being so pompous, being so self-righteous, being so arrogant as to wake up in the morning and to begin to think about how to organize the world according to what it is that you like. And so these are individuals, as we say on Ideas Have Consequences, as the posse has heard me say many times, the followers of this podcast, subscribers to this podcast, and by the way, make sure you do subscribe and that you sign up for our email list. And that is because we can work our way around the YouTube notifications, which I know many of you say that you're not getting. We just email you and let you know when a podcast is coming or an event such as this one that might interest you. But these are individuals who are incredibly arrogant. They think it's their place to tell you how you should live, whether or not you should or shouldn't eat meat, how many children you should or shouldn't have, even whether or not you should or should not live. Now, having said that, I think it's important that many of you develop a degree of skepticism about the things that you see about, even from conservative accounts on social media. There is a lot of fake stuff that's out there. I suppose I could maybe generate far more likes and retweets and followers if I were to really engage with a lot of this stuff and begin slinging it out there. But let me just make you aware that not every negative thing that is being said about the World Economic Forum online is true. Indeed, many of it, I think, much of it is meant to distract you, and it's meant to set conservatives up for a very convenient headshot by saying, we fact-checked this, and you guys, claim that Bill Gates says he wants to eliminate, half of the Earth's population. We never found him anywhere saying this. Beware of those headlines that are inflammatory and derogatory where the World Economic Forum is concerned that may not be true. I would want to point you to the fact that so much of what we do know about the World Economic Forum is negative. That is to say, the stuff that is true is negative enough that we don't have to invent stuff. I mean, we do know that Klaus Schwab, who is the founder and sole chairman of the World Economic Forum throughout its history. It was founded in 1971, and he remains to this day. He's 85 years old. He's a German. He's not Swiss. The organization itself is headquartered in Switzerland, but he's German. But I see a lot of people carrying on about who his father was or who his father wasn't. I don't think any of us necessarily should be judged according to who your parents were or weren't. I think you rise or fall on your own merits. I see some people saying that he's a Nazi. I don't believe he's a Nazi. I do believe he is a fascist, and there's a slight distinction to be made there. Nazism is by definition anti-Semitic. There's nothing in Schwab's history to suggest that he is an anti-Semite. He is, however, a fascist. The World Economic Forum is a fascist organization. Some people will say that they're Marxists. They're not Marxists. I'm making the distinction here that Marxism, socialism, communism, these are all ideologies that see the means of production, industry, owned by the state. Okay, so that's important that you understand that. There is no private property within that economic system. Fascism, on the other hand, there is private property. There's a kind of hyper-capitalism where it is owned by the state, industry is owned by the state, and it is carefully regulated and directed, typically for war. And you may say, war against whom? Well, in this case, it's against domestic populations. That's what ESG is. ESG is a fascist policy implementation to regiment the economy according to their own particular ideological dictates. So you don't bend the knee to them, your company suffers. ESG is handed down as a way to make you toe the ideological line as they should define what that looks like. And, we're seeing globally major industries that are being regulated and directed to make war on and to push particular policies on domestic populations. That's what we're seeing in the United States with Coca-Cola, with big tech, with the NFL, with Bud Light. That's what all this is. That's ESG driven, and that is fascism. And the World Economic Forum itself is fascist. So what I want to begin doing now is start taking some of your questions. Don't claim that I'll know the answers to all of them, but if we're ready over here, we'll start taking a few.
Yeah. Good morning, Larry. Let me tell you, one of the questions that we have from a lot of viewers that I'm noticing is that when they begin to talk about the World Economic Forum on YouTube or any kind of Google chat room, they begin being censored, and people are worried about YouTube censoring them. And so that was kind of one of the questions is, what do we do? How do we get the word out?
Yeah, well, listen, this is a problem. I mean, if you take a look at, YouTube is trash. I mean, I say that, and I'm talking on YouTube right now. It's controlled by Google. And I mean, Google, we know, is a sinister organization. You're talking about a fascist organization, fascist company. That's Google. I mean, Google is essentially the big tech version of BlackRock. So we already know this. I mean, all you have to do is go back and look. But this podcast is what, 3-4 months old? It's young. It's a very young podcast. We're getting hundreds of thousands of views on our podcast in the very beginning. And then we start getting choked. Suddenly, our views go down, not by 50%, not by 60%, more like, I'd say 95+% our views dropped. Now, why is that? Well, clearly, we're being censored. I mean, YouTube has put their foot on our throat. But I will tell you that our goal, I can't release any details here, but our goal is to eventually be elsewhere that you can find us. And by that, I don't just mean Rumble. Rumble is fine. The problem with Rumble is that Rumble, you really can't monetize it. And podcasts like this, you got to monetize them. I mean, it's expensive. Got to pay you, got to pay me, got to pay for all this. It's not cheap. But there are plans in the works to do that. That also brings me to X, to Twitter. Elon Musk, we have him on the one hand, it's like good cop, bad cop. We have him on the one hand saying that he's absolutely committed. He's a free speech absolutist, to quote him. And then on the other hand, we have Linda Yaccarino, his chosen CEO, who is what? A WEFer. She's a WEFer. She is a member of the World Economic Forum, and we have her, on the other hand, basically saying, no, we're not committed to free speech. I mean, they're censoring. She says freedom of speech, not freedom of reach, which is just censorship from the other side. The difference there being that, under the old regime, they didn't let you say what you wanted to say. They would, shadow ban you or maybe just ban you, just kick you off the platform. Linda Yaccarino's approach is more clever. They say, oh, yeah, you can say what you want. We just don't let people hear you. We just don't let people hear what you're saying. So this raises some very interesting questions about free speech. Why would Elon Musk go and hire this dreadful woman? Why would he do this? I'm not sure that I have the answer to that yet. I know many of you will say, he's controlled opposition. I don't believe that. But I do think that Musk isn't fully aware of what's going on his platform. No doubt she's in charge of the hiring and what's taking place at the lower levels. Who knows? But there's clearly rebellion within his organization, much as there was in Trump's government, within his own cabinet. I mean, his own CIA, his own FBI were rebelling. The State Department, the Justice Department were in open defiance of the wishes of the President of the United States. In the case of General Milley, we're talking outright treason. Outright treason. So this is where we find ourselves. But I would just encourage you, just keep pushing on these issues. You can do it on social media, but you can also, listen, the world doesn't depend on social media. I would say the better engagement is personal engagement, face-to-face, with your neighbors, with your colleagues, with your friends, with your family. Don't just think that you need one of these in order to engage with people. Next question.
Our next question comes from Ryan Hayboer, and he wants to know, where does WEF get all of its power to force private corporations into making these rash decisions?
Okay, I'm assuming people are hearing the questions you're asking, so I don't need to repeat them. Okay, where does the WEF get their power to do really basically anything? This is an excellent question, because the WEF itself doesn't have power. It's not a country. It doesn't have any armies. What it does have is influence, which of course is a kind of power, but they can't enforce a policy. All they can do is encourage states to follow their recommendations. Now, why would they do that? Well, think about this. The World Economic Forum this past year, when I was there, earlier this year, rather, in January of 2023, there were more than 50 heads of state at the annual gathering. 50 heads of state. This gives them an opportunity to gather together in a way that's unparalleled anywhere in the world. And that really is what the World Economic Forum is offering, is they are offering influence. They're offering influence. If Klaus Schwab is selling influence. Because think about this. Somebody may say, well, can't these people find each other and meet at the United Nations? Well, some of them can. But the United Nations is located within the borders of the United States. Davos in Switzerland, the annual gathering held by the World Economic Forum, is neutral. And thus it's a place where individuals like Xi and Macron and Biden and their lieutenants can all gather in a neutral place for ostensibly an agenda that's about improving the world and make plans together. Listen, tyrants, I think it was Alexander Solzhenitsyn who said this, that evil people support other evil people. It's their greatest strength. It's their greatest strength, says Solzhenitsyn, the Nobel Prize winner for literature, the Russian dissident who knew something about tyranny. That's what's happening here. So they're supporting each other in their own globalist evil causes. And how vastly influential are they? Well, we have Schwab. This isn't him saying something that's been altered by deep fakes. Schwab bragging that the World Economic Forum has penetrated the cabinets of Western governments. And they have. I mean, guys like Trudeau. I mean, is there a bigger POS on the planet than Trudeau? World Economic Forum member, various individuals within the Biden administration who fall into this category. Throughout the Western world, we find these kinds of individuals, and they're in lockstep with each other in pushing their agenda. Next question.
How does the World Economic Forum play into our current economy, and how do we relate that to Bidenomics?
Okay, well, the biggest way is through what I was talking about earlier, and that is ESG. ESG is a social credit score for companies. ESG is still in its early phases, but as the talons of ESG sink deeper and deeper into corporations, you will begin to see those companies that adhere to it flourish, and those that do not die, and that is because they will be excluded from the global economy. Your business doesn't bend the knee, you're done. You're done. And this is why you're seeing companies like Bud Light doing what they're doing. And it is because from their point of view, they have a choice. On the one hand, they can meet the needs, the desires of their consumers, and then face the wrath of the ESG types, or they can ignore their consumer base and please those who do the rankings of ESG. It's a lose-lose situation for corporations, but I really think those corporations have to begin to find some backbone and begin pushing back on all this.
You've said many times that the World Economic Forum is all about population control secretly. Can you tell us things that they're doing now to try to control the population, and how do we see these things and tell our friends about it so that they know and they'll believe us?
Yeah, the World Economic Forum is about population control. That is a core tenet of their belief. And some of you will be listening to this and be going, oh, I don't believe that. I don't believe. Go and look at their founding documents. The Predicament of Man, which was published, I think, in 1970, perhaps. The Predicament of Mankind, which was, it's a short paper. You can find it online. It was published by the Club of Rome, in which they recommend, they say, look, this is a global problem, global population. This came on the heels of a book that was alarmist. It was apocalyptic, a book by Paul Ehrlich called The Population Explosion, published in 1968. It was a mega bestseller, and everybody was buying into this. So the Club of Rome issues this paper and says we need an organization that's kind of an executive branch of the Club of Rome that sees that there's some implementation on these problems, chiefly population reducing the global population. That led to the founding of the World Economic Forum in 1971, but it didn't end there. You had guys like Henry Kissinger, who wrote National Security Memo 200. You can find this online, NSSM 200. You'll find it on the United States government website, and that is because of the Freedom of Information Act that eventually led to the release of this secret national security memo written by Kissinger to Nixon in 1974, in which Kissinger said we need to push a kind of global version of Planned Parenthood to reduce the global population. It's also around that time, 1973, that you have Roe v. Wade, meaning in the 1970s, there was an obsession with population, that population needed to be reduced. And that has continued on to this day. You will find in one of our earlier podcasts on Bill Gates, go and watch that podcast. It has probably a couple 100,000 views. And Bill Gates, we're using his own words. We're not making anything up. We're using his own words, where you can go on this platform on YouTube and find him talking at a variety of conferences, even putting out his own video on population reduction. Now, he's careful in the things that he says most of the time, but not all the time. You'll find him in an interview, also in that same podcast of ours, where he talks about so-called death panels. What does he mean by death panels? He means more or less a panel that is either government run or, say, run by your insurance company, that determines end-of-life issues, whether or not you do or do not get that expensive, transplant, or whether or not you do or do not continue to receive treatment because you're already elderly and we maybe need to just let you go. This is all, again, moving in the direction of a social credit system. Sam Harris wrote a book, who I don't like. Again, he's one of these academic atheists. He wrote a book about, and he's an ass, by the way. Let me add that. He wrote a book maybe, 10, 15 years ago that's called The Moral Landscape. And he's advocating a social credit score as it relates to these kinds of issues that would say, listen, we have somebody who needs a kidney transplant. We have a surgeon here, and we have a high school football coach. Social credit system would say, well, the surgeon is more important to society. We don't need football coaches. You see how this works? This is the way they're thinking.
All right, Fernando Cruz asks.
I like that name, Fernando Cruz.
He's actually a big fan. He's on here a lot. Do you think if you were to ask Yuval Noah Harari on your show, would he come? And let me add a question to that. What would you ask him?
If I asked him on the show, would he come on the show? I'm sure he would not. I doubt it. I see Harari in two ways. First of all, I see him as either as a psychopath or a sociopath. I haven't quite decided which he is, but I think he's one of them. The way he talks about, I like the way, I think it was either New York Magazine or maybe it was the New Yorker that said of Harari, he speaks of bumping off human beings very dispassionately, but he gets very exercised over the idea of industrial farming. I mean, that makes him very passionate. Human beings, human suffering doesn't bother him at all. And that seems to be the case. But Harari, I think, is given far too much credit. As if you've watched the interview that I did recently with Oxford University scientist, mathematician, philosopher, theologian, Professor John Lennox on artificial intelligence, we talked a little bit about Yuval Noah Harari, and I think Lennox agrees with me that he's a bit of a P.T. Barnum. He by training, he's not a scientist. He's a historian like me. That's his primary training. But he actually isn't writing or doing much history. He's become a bit of a futurist. He's a guy who's always talking about the future, that this is going to happen and that's going to happen, and all these things are going to be the result of this. He isn't the guy who's developing this. How much does he actually know? I don't know. I will say this, that he is a brilliant self-promoter. The guy's selling books. Individuals are funding him, funding his, he's a gay Israeli. He is a gay Israeli, which brings up some very interesting questions all unto itself. But I don't think Harari is the primary individual that you should be worried about. I think we need to be looking beyond him to the actual developers, the individuals with the real power, like Bill Gates, Sergey Brin, other people at Google, who are developing this kind of stuff. I think they're the individuals that are the ones with the real power.
All right, Rachel Nichols asks, does the WEF plan on a lot of corporations going belly up? Because some of the biggest can survive, but many will go broke. And I'll just ask you, is that the ultimate plan with them?
Rachel Nichols, isn't there Rachel Nichols with ESPN? I think she's with ESPN. She was involved in a controversy a couple of years ago. Anyway, I think that what you're seeing is bigger corporations gobbling up the smaller corporations, just as we've seen it in the banking industry. I mean, my own bank has probably changed, I'm not exaggerating, maybe 4 times in the last 10 years. I mean, there's name changes. This one gobbles up this one, and this one buys out that one, and this one merges with this one. We're seeing that across the board in a variety of industries where the billionaires are buying up the smaller companies. Is this what the WEF wants? Hard for me to say. What they do want is that they should all bend the knee to ESG. Beware of, when you look at Agenda 230, which is 2030, excuse me, when you look at the United Nations Agenda 2030, what word comes up all over the United Nations website in explaining Agenda 2030? Is sustainability. It's the word sustainability, which I've told you is freighted with nothing that is good. Nothing in that train is good. Nothing that comes after that word is good. It's all fundamentally anti-human. And the World Economic Forum wants to see all corporations bow down to ESG. And those that don't, they want to see them die. And that's happening.
You've got a few folks in here that you've got a couple that have said that the World Economic Forum cares about our people and cares about where our world is heading. What do you say to those folks? Because obviously, how do you lead those folks into seeing the truth?
There are people saying that on the chat?
Yes. Okay,
good. I'd love to have some of those people on. I'd love to have them sitting right here and hear their argument. You think that they care about people? They don't care about people. I mean, listen to Dennis Meadows. Go back and watch our podcast on the World Economic Forum. Not making anything up, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not putting words in their mouth. We are simply showing you what they're saying, and I'm explaining to you the meaning of it in case you didn't catch it. So that you have guys like Dr. Dennis Meadows, who is I think his PhD is in something like system analysis or something. He's not really a scientist. He's like a computer programmer. But Dr. Dennis Meadows, who wrote one of the books that has vastly influenced the thinking behind the World Economic Forum. And that's a book called Limits to Growth. Limits to Growth. That book has supposedly sold about 30 million copies. I don't believe that. I suspect they've distributed about 30 million copies. But regardless, it's a vastly influential book. There were four authors to that book. Dr. Dennis Meadows is one of them. He's still alive. And we have Meadows saying Again, go and watch it on our podcast, that we need to reduce the global population from roughly 8 billion to preferably 1 billion, but certainly less than 2 billion. And then he says, I hope we can do it peacefully. Then he continues to say, it's not enough to say that, he continues to say that what we really need is a dictatorship. The world would be a better place if we had a dictatorship. Now, I want you to tell me how Dr. Dennis Meadows, again, one of the people who has vastly influenced the thinking behind the World Economic Forum, whose title is World Economic Forum Agenda Contributor. How is a guy like that pro-human? How is he pro-human? How is he pro-freedom? How is he pro anything that is good? These people are messed up in the head. I mean, they are messed up. And it is because they are so detached from the reality of real life for real people. One of the things, listen, as a writer, one of my little, I guess my tagline, slogan for my work, for my website is that I'm your man in the field. I'm your man in the field. I don't sit here and just pontificate week after week after week without knowing really what's going on outside the doors and windows of this studio. I get out. As I say, I was at the World Economic Forum. I've already been in this year probably 5, 6, 7, 8 countries. Since the pandemic began, I've been in about 15 or 20 countries. I'm trying very hard to keep my finger on the global, not just the national, not just the regional, not just within my own town, pulse. I want to know what real people are thinking, both high and low. What's going on in their lives? What are the problems that they're dealing with? What is going on in the world? When we come to talking about the World Economic Forum, we're talking about individuals who don't have a clue what real life is like. Some of you will be old enough to remember that when George H.W. Bush, the father, the first president in the Bush family, when he was running for president, one of the things that was used against him was the fact that at that time, this is in the late 80s, maybe it was when he was running for a second term, I don't recall, but late 80s, early 90s, the scanners at grocery stores had just come along, where you scan an item, beep, beep, beep. And George Bush, who was trying to get out and be a man of the people, went to the grocery store and hadn't a clue what that was. And he was criticized far and wide for it as a man who was completely detached from reality. Well, he had been vice president of the United States for 8 years. He had been head of the CIA, I think, for 8 years. He'd been president of the United States for 4 years. Since when had he not been riding in a motorcade where all traffic stopped as he went through? That's what we're talking about with World Economic Forum types. I'm taking 4 trains and planes and automobiles to get to the World Economic Forum. They fly in and fly private jets and then fly helicopters the rest of the way in. They don't have any idea what life is like for real people and what makes them dangerous, and hence ideologues, idiots, is that these are people who are so dedicated to their own ideas. They think ideas matter more than people. I would encourage all of you to read. I think we're going to start on here a book club, a reading club, which will be separate. It'll be subscription-based. You can be a part of that. It'll be a smaller live discussion that we will do from time to time, not as regularly as this, but say maybe once a month. I go ahead and assign you the first reading, and that is this. Go and read a short story by Russell Kirk, who many say is the father of American conservatism. Russell Kirk, he wrote a little short story called Ex Tenebris. And that book is that little short story is worth reading because it is comparing World Economic Forum type of thinking. He wrote it before the World Economic Forum was founded, but still that mindset is not a new mindset. It's a socialist mindset. It is a fundamentally anti-human mindset. And he's comparing that with the lives of real people who want to enjoy fresh air, who don't want to live in prefabricated Khrushchev-era housing. They want to enjoy real life. They want to enjoy their families. And you have on the other end somebody who is imbued with this kind of anti-human thinking that can't stand the idea that there are those people out there who have not yet conformed to the lives that government would like to give them. It's called Ex Tenebris. It's by Russell Kirk. I will at some point discuss that, probably in a little reading group that we'll do.
So you have a lot of people on here that are commenting about WEF wanting us to
whether or not my jacket is pink or red.
yeah.
I'm colorblind. I'm told that it's pink, but when I ordered it, they told me it was red.
Yeah, I don't think it's neither. So these people are asking, WEF wants to make people eat bugs, and they are growing meat in laboratories. And believe it or not, it's actually a large part of your chat. There's several people that have asked the same question.
Eat the bugs.
Yes. So they want to know, why? Why are they doing that?
Yeah, Bill Gates this is true, by the way. This is not some fiction here. This is actually real. Bill Gates is a big fan of growing, what's it called? Beyond beef, I think is what it's called. It's this lab-grown, it's not meat. They call it meat, but lab-grown meat, it's disgusting. This is the kind of stuff they want you to have. And they say that bugs are the kinds of things that, there can be so many nutrients from this. It'd be good for you, be healthy. And bugs aren't as big of a danger to the planet because they maintain that cow flatulence, yes, cow farts, are a global threat. Fear is the primary tool for controlling people. I was thinking about this the last couple of days. When we're done recording this morning, we will go into recording another podcast. And it's a podcast in which I'm going to be talking about truth, the destruction of truth. And the left has been working at destroying belief in absolute truth for not a few decades, not a century, but much, much longer than that. It is a desire to annihilate belief in absolute truth and then to replace it with something else. Well, in the modern era, they want to replace absolute truth with pseudoscience. So your belief in God, which if you're a Christian or a Muslim or an Orthodox Jew, you believe in absolute truth that is handed down from on high from a lawgiver. That's a capital L. That is to say, God. They want to annihilate that belief and say, no, the state is supreme and the state rules scientifically. Scientifically, it's a way of putting everything in the hands of so-called experts. How often have you seen that word being used in the era of the pandemic? Experts say this, experts say that. They want to put it in the hands of select experts who adhere to their own ideological formulas, who then govern from a scientific point of view. And so they're maintaining science says that cows are a problem. Science says that meat is not healthy for you. Science says there's a lot of protein in bugs and you should eat them. This is all real. This is how these people think. How many bugs do you think Klaus Schwab is eating? I don't think he's eating any bugs. Do you think Bill Gates eats his own Beyond Beef?
No.
Not a chance.
Have you seen it grown in a lab? It's disgusting.
It's absolutely disgusting. And this is the way these people think. And if you're wondering about that, just ask yourself, why is Bill Gates buying up land? Why is he buying up farmland? What's going on with that? Why is he even being allowed to do this? But this is happening. And it is, again, because this is the way these kinds of people think.
That leads us to a question by Joseph Davis, and he wants to know, is the WEF prepared to replace Klaus Schwab as its leader?
If so, it's never been stated publicly, but there must be a plan. there because Klaus Schwab, as we've said, is 85 years old, and he's pushing transhumanism. He's a big fan of transhumanism. I'm sure he'd love to see that accelerated just a little bit, so that he could upload, his own consciousness to a laptop or a robot or whatever it is. But it doesn't seem like we're on that kind of timeline. But the World Economic Forum is run by Klaus Schwab. Has Schwab named his own successor? If he has, he's not done it publicly. There are those who are pushing him to do that and think he should do that, but it hasn't happened as yet. Next question.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions here. Nacho Dog. That's
Nacho Dog.
Nacho Dog.
Is that like nacho, or is it like it's not yo dog?
No, it's nacho, like the chip.
Okay, got it.
Why would anybody give Bill Gates any recognition? How did he get where he is?
Money. Yeah, it's a great question, because you would think, I think it's Elon Musk who said privately, but this got out, that after meeting Bill Gates, he decided he was, and I don't remember his exact words, but he didn't like Gates. He decided that the guy was dangerous, that he was crazy. Money buys Bill Gates a seat at the table. Go and watch that podcast we did on Bill Gates, I don't know, maybe a month ago, maybe a couple of months ago, I'm not sure, but we go into who he is and how he's managed to buy influence, particularly in media. I mean, imagine, what must it be like that when somebody criticizes me online, there'd be an army of monitors whose job it is to run so-called fact checks to defend me, that always seem to rule in my favor on fact checks, that USA Today and various media outlets all write positive stories about me or defend me. And that is because Bill Gates is giving millions of dollars to media organizations, media outlets, who in turn, they know which side their bread is buttered and who's doing it. And they make sure that they say nice things about Bill Gates. Interestingly, there was an article written about Bill Gates and his influence in media in, of all magazines, Jacobin magazine. Jacobin magazine is a socialist magazine. It is a hard left magazine, but they did some real reporting. I mean, some real reporting on Bill Gates and how he has money that we know, roughly $250 million, that is going to media organizations, but that he's also doing it in ways that can't be tracked, dark money that probably vastly exceeds the $250 million we know about. So that's why he gets treated the way he does.
Do you think that our economy and this new digital currency and the new Chinese currency, do you think that WEF is behind a lot of this, trying to create a one world currency in order to help control?
I don't know if they're behind it, but they are certainly in support of it. Let's put it that way. You're seeing a lot of different agendas coming together that weren't invented by the World Economic Forum. Let's take, for instance, open borders. What we're seeing on our southern borders, what's been happening in Europe for well over a decade. And that is the philosophy of Karl Popper. Karl Popper, who was a philosopher, he was a professor at the London School of Economics, who was one of his students, George Soros. Popper wrote a 2-volume book, seminal work called The Open Society and Its Enemies, published in, I think, 1962, roughly. George Soros goes and founds a nonprofit called the Open Society Foundation. Do you think that there's any coincidence in that? Absolutely not. And incidentally, when I was talking about Kissinger, you know who one of Kissinger's students was? Klaus Schwab at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. So there are dots that are connected here. Was Karl Popper in some way an influence on or was he aware of the World Economic Forum? Well, when he wrote The Open Society and Its Enemies, there was no World Economic Forum at that point. But these people are finding each other at the platform that the World Economic Forum provides. And the idea of open borders is something that is certainly supported by the World Economic Forum, and that is because the power of the United States which vastly outstrips that of the rest of the world, has to be reduced. It has to be reduced. The United States, the goal of the World Economic Forum isn't to raise, or the United Nations, it isn't to raise the standard of living in third world countries and what I'll call second world countries up to the level of the United States. It's to reduce the United States to the level of third world countries. That's the goal. That's the direction that we're headed in. And I want you to bear that in mind as you see the things that are happening with our borders that are wide open. Do you think there are some terrorists who maybe have come across our border? Oh, I think so. Do you think that there will be attacks on our infrastructure? Do you think that there will be an uprising, an attack that is similar to what we're seeing in the Middle East right now? 100%. It's coming. It's coming.
That's perfect lead into the next question by OCB Bama.
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide, yes. The question is the World Economic Forum capable of secretly funding a war?
No, I mean, the World Economic Forum doesn't have that kind of money, but can it facilitate that? Does it have contacts with and board members who are capable of funding wars? For sure. Go on the World Economic Forum's own website and look and see who their board members are, who their trustees are. It'll blow your mind. Head of Google, you have, I just said there were more than 50 heads of state at this year's World Economic Forum annual gathering in Davos. There were more than 600 CEOs of major corporations that were there. 601 if you include me. I'm the director of Fixed Point Foundation. It was a joke. Actually, it's not, I mean, I was there, but we're not a major organization. But these CEOs, do they have the money that exceeds that of some small countries? Without a doubt. Could they fund a secret war? Yes. Yes, they could. And they are, insofar as they're members of the World Economic Forum and they're pushing a war on humanity. When you're talking openly about reducing the global population, you hate human beings. You hate human beings. You are making war on human beings. When you're talking about people eating bugs and no longer eating meat and 15-minute cities, and you're talking about mass immigration and open borders, and you're talking about digital IDs, these are all things these people are talking about. You hate human beings. You hate human beings. And these people do. They do. But they think of themselves as good. They think of themselves as good. They think of themselves as morally upright. And that's why they think it is their right to tell you what to do and how to live. Because they are just that bloody arrogant.
Wow. Okay. So Marcel has a very interesting question. Does WEF benefit from the racial unrest or disillusion of racial unrest in our country? Or are they agitating it in any way?
I don't know that the World Economic Forum is involved with things like, let's say, Black Lives Matter, but they certainly give lip service to it. Meaning, would they be needed to do that? No, but they give lip service to all of these kinds of Marxist agendas. Now, I've said that they're not a Marxist organization; they're fascist. But the two, the two eventually meet. Those lines eventually cross, and they're using Marxist tactics at the grassroots. Well, there is some looting going on. The grassroots level, and they benefit from disharmony. They benefit from all the disruptions that are taking place in culture because they can always, listen, tyrants always do this. Tyrants cause disruptions and then present themselves as the solution to the problems they've created. This is the tactics of the Bolsheviks. It's the tactics of the fascists, the Nazis under Adolf Hitler. It's the tactics long before them of Muhammad. Muhammad, within the Quran states that you should terrorize, that's the word, you should terrorize unbelievers. Do not give them rest until they convert, pay a tax, or die. make them long for peace with you and to accept your terms. This is what's going on in the United States right now with things like the pandemic and so forth, so that when your government tells you you're allowed to go outside, you're grateful to your government, who's the one who's tyrannizing you to begin with. When they tell you, hey, you no longer have to wear a mask, you're so grateful to the government that was tyrannizing you to begin with. You see how this works? It's a kind of Stockholm syndrome. You begin to be grateful to your captor, to the one who's torturing you in the first place. So that's the kind of thing that's going on, and the World Economic Forum is certainly party to that because they feel nothing but contempt for ordinary people.
AI bot, which is actually a real person. He's in here telling people,
Okay.
I'm just a real person and changed my name. He's asked several times, have you ever read the document, Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars?
I have not.
Okay. And he just wanted to know. So the next question about WEF, how do you think WEF correlates controlling world leaders like Biden or Obama into doing the things that they want done? Is it money that controls them? How do these people get involved in WEF?
Yeah, I think it goes the other way around. I think you have world leaders who are controlling the WEF. I don't think the WEF is controlling them, at least when we're talking about the level of Joe Biden and Obama. Listen, there's a big difference between Joe Biden and Barack Obama. Barack Obama is an ideologue. He is an ideologue. We know this about him. We know of his love for, his great admiration for and use of the tactics of Saul Alinsky. We know that about Obama. Biden is an empty suit. Biden is a guy with a for sale sign around his neck. He is willing to be whatever you want him to be if it advances his own ambitions, which is to be rich, powerful, famous, liked, whatever. So is Biden himself a Marxist? No. Is he happy to be one if you pay him to be one? Sure. Biden is a mercenary. He's just simply a guy for sale. That is not Barack Obama. It is not Hillary Clinton. Those are individuals who are absolutely sold out to their own anti-human ideas and their tyrannical ideas. Biden, we know he's not writing what's on his teleprompter. He's not writing his own speeches. He's just saying what he's told to say. Again, go and watch a podcast we did maybe a month ago in which we pointed this out, that Biden's gaffes are the result of the fact that other people are controlling Joe Biden. So he's just a guy who is for sale. Is he a globalist? He's not a globalist, but he'll be one if you want him to be. We have him in a video when he was 29-year-old senator. We played on this podcast him saying that he was willing to, quote, prostitute myself to the people with the money. He's willing to do that in exchange for power. That's what he wants. That's who he is. That's not who Barack Obama is. Next question. We've got 3 minutes and 55 seconds.
So there's a lot of people asking the same question, and I do know that you have already answered this. Maybe go a little further. Do you think that the WEF is helping coordinate the Ukraine and Israel war?
Do I think that they're helping coordinate the war? I think that they are. I think their tentacles are deeply involved in that war in a very, very major way. How exactly it's going to take an investigative reporter to track that down. I would just urge, if there are any of them following here, listening today, they need to follow the money. Where's the money? What do you think is going on with all this money? Billions of dollars, roughly what? $200 billion given by the United States there. Let's talk about what's happening in Ukraine. Is the Biden administration, do they care at all about Ukraine, the Ukrainian people? No, they don't. They do want to topple Putin. And so Ukraine is being used, cynically used, in a proxy war against Russia. So we're not directly fighting Russia. We're using the Ukrainians. We'll give you the weapons. You go fight them. You go fight them. But also we know, listen, I was in Poland earlier this year and I was interviewing Ukrainian refugees. who are pouring into Poland. I didn't get to interview nearly as many of them as I wanted to, or for as long as I had hoped, but I was in, where was I? Was I in Krakow? No, I was in Warsaw. I've been in Krakow, but I was in Warsaw interviewing them. And what they'll tell you is, we're not seeing any of this money. We're not seeing the money. We're not being helped. It's not trickling down to that level. It's like the $6 billion that the Biden administration just released gave essentially to the Iranian government. Is that helping the average Iranian? No. Is it helping Hamas? Yes. So what is happening in Ukraine is that Ukraine is being used to launder billions of dollars that no doubt are being used for WEF agenda purposes. In the same way that we left all of these weapons, $85 billion plus in state-of-the-art military hardware was left in Afghanistan. And are you noticing the weapons that are being used by Hamas? Those are M4s they're carrying, not AK-47s. The M4 is an American-made machine gun. It is an American-made gun that you're seeing Hamas use against Israelis. The next Charlie Hebdo-like terrorist attack that takes place in the WEF will be committed with weapons that were left in Afghanistan. This is what the Biden administration wanted. This is fast and furious to the 10th power. That's what's happening here. So if you think that leaving those weapons in Afghanistan was somehow just a money-saving measure, it wasn't. If you think that what's going on in Afghanistan is about preserving democracy and freedom, in Ukraine, if you think that's what it's about, it isn't. Maybe time for one more quick question.
Okay, and I think this is a great ending question. David Chabadarev wants to know, how do we keep track of what the WEF is doing?
Well, just pay attention. Pay attention, try to connect the dots. Stay connected to this podcast. I will be at the World Economic Forum in January of 2024. I follow the World Economic Forum very closely, and I urge you to subscribe. Smash that notification button, subscribe, become a part of the posse, share this podcast with other people. It has been great to be with you on Ideas Have Consequences.